Picture a surgeon. He's 83 years old, white coat, scrubbed hands, and he is not watching from the doorway. He is not advising from the side of the room. He is operating. Chest open, heart exposed. His hands doing exactly what they have done for 50 years. His name was Ellsworth Wareham. He was born in 1914 in East Texas, raised on a farm in Alberta, Canada, trained as a cardiothoracic surgeon at a time when open-heart surgery was still being invented. He performed over 12,000 operations during his career. He retired from active surgery at 74, and then kept going to the hospital every week for 2 more decades. At 83, still operating when needed. At 90, driving 60 miles each way to guide younger surgeons. At 95, the hospital finally asked him to stop coming in to assist. He died in December 2018. He was 104 years old. And here is the part that matters most for what we're talking about today. He never developed dementia, no cognitive decline, no memory loss, no Alzheimer's, mentally sharp, completely lucid, until the end. In a country where 1 in 3 adults over 85 has Alzheimer's, this man made it to 104 with the mind of a surgeon. And it wasn't luck. It really wasn't. Today I want to show you exactly what Wareham did differently, not theories, documented practices, studied, verified, and backed by research that's only now starting to explain the biology. There are 3 pillars, 3 things that researchers identified in his life and in the lives of the other centenarians of Loma Linda, California, that regulate the exact biological mechanisms that, when they fail, lead to cognitive decline. And there's one thing Wareham said in an interview, something so simple that the researchers almost missed it, because it was too simple to be the answer. I'll get to that at the end, but it only makes sense after you understand the first 2. But first, let me tell you what most people assume explains a story like this. Because if you don't clear this out first, the rest won't land. The first explanation, genetics. He was born this way. Lucky family. Good DNA. The second, he was a doctor. He had access to information most people don't. That second one is the most popular, and it's the easiest to take apart. Wareham was a cardiothoracic surgeon, not a neurologist, not a longevity researcher. He wasn't following some cutting-edge cognitive health protocol. He didn't take special supplements. He had no custom brain health program. What he had was a lifestyle, daily choices. The same choices made by the other long-lived residents of Loma Linda, a city in Southern California with the highest concentration of centenarians in the United States. The only blue zone in America. And here's what the research found when it looked at that community. When Seventh-day Adventists, Wareham's religious community, moved away from Loma Linda and adopted a Western diet and lifestyle, the longevity advantage disappeared within 2 generations. Not genetics, not luck. Practice, repeated, every day. Before the pillars, you need to understand what they're fighting against. Cognitive decline has 3 primary drivers, and all 3 begin quietly, decades before you notice a single symptom. First, chronic brain inflammation. That low fire you don't feel, but that burns neurons silently for years. Amyloid plaques, the hallmark of Alzheimer's, grow in inflamed environments. You're not building a disease overnight. You're building it 1 inflammatory meal, 1 sleepless week, 1 sustained period of unmanaged stress at a time. Second, insulin resistance in the brain. Some researchers now call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, and not casually. Insulin resistance in the brain reduces glucose uptake by neurons. Neurons without fuel die. Connections disappear. The brain shrinks, slowly, quietly. Third, isolation. This one surprises people, but social isolation chronically elevates cortisol. Elevated cortisol damages the hippocampus, the brain's memory formation center. Research shows that chronic loneliness increases dementia risk by 50%. Wareham attacked all 3, without ever naming them. He just lived a certain way. When a journalist from Fox News interviewed Wareham at age 100, she asked what he ate. He thought for a second. At middle age, I decided to become a vegan. With the exception of an occasional piece of fish, all I eat are plants. Breakfast, whole grain cereal with soy milk, fruit, toast with nut butter, a handful of nuts. Second meal, beans, raw vegetables, cooked asparagus, broccoli, and cabbage. Dates and nuts for dessert. 2 large meals a day. Water as his main drink, no refined sugar. For decades, his cholesterol was 117. For reference, cardiac risk drops dramatically below 150. His was 117. But what does that have to do with the brain? Everything. What's good for the heart is good for the brain, not as a metaphor. As a mechanism, vascular inflammation is one of the fastest pathways to brain inflammation. 2020 study in JAMA Internal Medicine followed over 8,000 people for 25 years and found that a predominantly plant-based diet reduced dementia risk by 19%. Nuts, which Wareham ate every single day, contain alpha-linolenic acid, a precursor to the omega-3 DHA. DHA is the primary structural fatty acid of the cerebral cortex. Without it, communication between neurons degrades. Memory consolidation slows. Recall becomes effortful in ways you start attributing to aging when it was really always nutrition. Beans and legumes provide folate. Low folate is consistently associated with cognitive deficit and elevated Alzheimer's risk in adults over 65. It's not a marginal association. It shows up in study after study. And here is the modern trap most people fall into. When people hear this, the impulse is to buy supplements, omega-3 capsules, folate pills, vitamin B12 in a bottle. Wareham never took cognitive supplements. He ate the whole food, and the difference is enormous. A landmark study in the Annals of Internal Medicine, tracking over 400,000 adults for years, showed that isolated vitamin supplements have minimal evidence of cognitive protection. The whole foods do. The food matrix, the fiber, the way nutrients interact together during digestion, changes how they arrive at the brain. You can't put that in a capsule. The capsule gives you the compound. The food gives you the context. And the context is everything. How to start this week. First, add a handful of walnuts to breakfast every day. This is the single most studied, most accessible habit in this entire system. You don't need to change anything else yet. Just add the nuts. Then, replace at least one meal a day with plant-based. Not all at once. One meal, beans with vegetables, a lentil soup, a stir-fry with tofu and whatever vegetables you already have at home. And there's a detail most people skip. Wareham ate 2 large meals a day, not 6 small ones. That spacing between meals has its own mechanism. I'll get to that in the third pillar. But first, there's something even more powerful, and it's the thing most people never connect to brain protection. I want to tell you something that sounds unbelievable. Wareham retired from active surgery at 74, and then kept going to the hospital anyway. At 83, still operating when cases came up. At 90, still scrubbing in to guide younger surgeons through complex procedures. At 95, still driving 60 miles each way to be there. Someone once asked his wife Barbara when he was finally going to retire. People ask me that all the time, and I just say, leave him alone. He's happy. I don't think he'd be nearly as happy just sitting at home. That's not a motivation story. That's neuroscience. Purpose, having a clear reason to get up in the morning, a role that matters to other people, activates the prefrontal cortex in ways that simple leisure doesn't. Consistent cognitive challenge builds what researchers call cognitive reserve. Think of cognitive reserve as a buffer. When damage starts accumulating in the brain, which happens to all of us with age, people with high cognitive reserve can absorb more of it before symptoms appear. Their brains literally find alternative routes around damaged areas. A 2019 study published in JAMA Psychiatry followed over 6,000 adults across decades. Those with the highest sense of purpose had 2.4 times lower risk of developing Alzheimer's. 2.4 times, that's not a small number. But here's the mechanism that goes beyond purpose itself. Learning new things, continuing to be challenged, to make mistakes, to correct them, to master something you didn't know before, maintains neuroplasticity. The brain literally forms new synaptic connections when you learn, and it loses that capacity when you stop being challenged. Wareham, in his 80s, was still learning new surgical techniques, still teaching residents who came from other countries to train under him, still reading medical literature, still being surprised by new findings. His brain was working, every day. And here is the modern trap I'm most concerned about. Many people retire and stop learning, stop being challenged, stop having a role that matters to someone else, and they enter what researchers call a state of cognitive understimulation. The brain, with nothing hard to do, begins to contract, not dramatically, quietly, over years. The atrophy is real. It shows up on scans. It happens whether or not you feel it happening. Rest is not the problem. Stagnation is. How to apply this? First, identify one new thing to learn right now, not someday, now. It doesn't have to be medicine, a language, an instrument, a completely unfamiliar cuisine, chess, something that makes you fail and try again. The failure is the point. That's where new connections form. Second, find a way to stay useful to someone. Mentoring, teaching, volunteering in an area where your experience matters. Not for the output, for what the act of teaching does to your own brain. Third, if you've already retired from formal work, keep a project, a regular responsibility, something that requires you to show up present and thinking. The form doesn't matter. The cognitive demand does. And now, the third pillar, the one that the researchers almost missed. If this is useful to you, consider subscribing. Every week I go deep on one longevity system, always with the science, always with something practical you can start this week. In the early years of the Loma Linda Centenarian research, the scientists focused on what they could measure easily: blood pressure, cholesterol, dietary composition, exercise frequency. All of that told a clear story, but one researcher noticed something that didn't show up in the standard measurements. When he visited the homes of the Centenarians who had followed the traditional Adventist lifestyle longest, the ones with the most years of the practices, he found something specific in how they related to their own lives. It wasn't what they ate. It was how they carried the weight of living. In an interview, Wareham was asked about this directly. He said, "I think it's important for an individual to have some security and peace in his life. I have that through believing in a loving and caring God. If He's in charge of my life, why worry? He takes care of the universe. He can certainly take care of me." That might sound like a simple religious answer. Look at what the science says about what he was describing. Chronic stress elevates cortisol. Persistently elevated cortisol damages the hippocampus, the brain structure most central to memory formation. This is one of the most documented pathways in dementia research. A 2021 study published in Neurology followed 2,231 adults over 8 years. Those with the highest levels of chronic psychological distress, persistent worry, rumination, chronic anxiety, had a 38% higher chance of developing dementia. 38%, not from what they ate, from how they related to the problems of their lives. Wareham lived inside the Adventist community of Loma Linda. Studies on this community, including the Adventist Health Study that followed 96,000 people, show that Adventists with greater community engagement and spiritual practice have less depression, more emotional well-being, and a life expectancy 7 to 10 years longer than the American average. It wasn't just the diet, it was the whole structure. The Sabbath, a full day each week of rest, family connection, deliberate deceleration, no work, no agenda, a community that had known you for decades, a sense that your life had meaning beyond your own productivity. The brain doesn't age in a vacuum. It ages, or doesn't, inside a life. And the kind of life matters more than any supplement you can buy. And here is the modern trap that is the quietest and most damaging of the three. We live in a culture that glorifies busyness, the full schedule, constant output, and that treats rest, community, and silence as luxuries you'll get to when everything is finished. The problem is that everything is never finished. Wareham was raised in a tradition that stopped completely once a week. No phone, no work, family, worship, rest, not laziness, brain hygiene. How to apply this? First, don't wait for a life event to stop. Build intentional pauses now. Once a week, a period where you fully disconnect. No notifications, no productivity, just presence. The research doesn't care what form this takes. It cares that it happens consistently. Second, invest in community with the same seriousness you invest in diet. Research shows that chronic social isolation is as damaging as smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of dementia risk. 15 cigarettes a day. This is not a soft finding. It shows up in the biology. Third, whatever practice gives you genuine access to inner peace. Not meditation because it's trendy. the thing that actually stops the noise in your brain. It can be faith, it can be nature, it can be prayer, it can be a long walk without earphones. The form is yours. The requirement is real. The brain that rests is the brain that repairs. Here's how the complete system worked in Wareham's life. Pillar 1, plant-based diet. 2 large meals a day. Whole grains, fruit, beans, vegetables, nuts. No refined sugar, cholesterol at 117 at age 100. Brain inflammation, chronically low. Pillar 2, continuous purpose. Worked until 95. Drove 60 miles to the hospital. Kept learning, kept teaching, kept being needed. Cognitive reserve, exceptional. Pillar 3, community and peace of mind. Practicing Adventist. Loma Linda community, weekly Sabbath. A relationship with his own life that didn't generate chronic anxiety. Cortisol, controlled. Hippocampus, intact. 3 things, that's the system. Honest timeline. In the first 2 weeks of the dietary shift, most people notice more stable energy and less mental fog. Nothing dramatic. A small, real signal. In the first month with a consistent learning project, you start noticing your mind is sharper, more able to focus, less scattered. Things that used to take effort start taking less. In the first month with intentional rest and more social contact, less background anxiety. That low-level worry you'd been carrying without noticing gets lighter. At 90 days with the full system running, these are no longer habits that require effort. They're just how you live. And here's what makes Wareham's story matter more than a list of tips. The benefits of these practices are cumulative. Every decade of plant-based eating, every decade of active purpose, every decade of genuine community, it builds a cognitive reserve that is literally visible on brain scans. You are not trying to reverse damage. You are building protection. We go back to the beginning. A surgeon, 83 years old, white coat, chest open in front of him, hands that have done this 12,000 times. Most of us look at an image like that and feel 2 things at the same time, admiration and distance, as if it were something that happened to someone else. But the Loma Linda Centenarian research spent decades documenting that it wasn't destiny, it wasn't special genes, it wasn't luck, it was how he ate, every day. It was the reason he had to get up every morning. It was how he slept at night without carrying the weight of tomorrow. It wasn't what Wareham avoided that protected his brain. It was what he built, meal by meal, day by day for 100 years. Your action for today, this week, add a handful of walnuts to breakfast. Every day, and identify 1 new thing you're going to learn. 1 thing, just 1. That's where it starts. If you want to keep going, subscribe. Every week we go deep on 1 longevity system, 1 practice, 1 complete framework, 1 question before you go. Tell me in the comments. Of the 3 pillars we covered today, diet, purpose, or peace of mind, which one do you feel you need to work on most right now? I read every comment. I want to know where you are. Wareham made it to 104 with the mind of a surgeon. The question isn't whether that's possible. The question is what you're going to do this week.